Hi guys, this is Adam at the Astro Imaging channel. Today it's an open chat session, and I have a few topics in mind. But if at first on the Google Plus page I did offer to have anybody ask any specific questions or troubleshoot. So if anybody has anything, they're welcome to share it as viewers chime in online. I will invite them to share stuff. I did check again. For some reason today the Q&A isn't working. Don't know why, but you can put it in the comments on the Google Plus page if you do have any questions, and I tend to get them fairly quickly. And I'll ask anybody in the room. Anyone have anything specific they wanted to ask about? Alex has a little story to tell about PhD update.
Oh, I guess I'll unmute myself and tell it while we're waiting for other people to pitch in here. Well, we're looking at your screen the other day. Your PhD screen was a little different from my PhD2 screen. So I went and decided I was probably behind in an update or so. So I went to update, what is it, to 2.31 maybe, 2.3 something. And it required, for my Gemini, a 1.54 update on ASCOM. And so I went and did both. You know, I figured perfectly safe. It wasn't. I couldn't get PhD2 to work at all. It kept having a problem with slewing. It would stop because everything was slewing, and I mean it wasn't slewing. It was the pulse guide themselves were considered slewing. So it said, "Oh, if you're slewing, I'm going to stop." Apparently, there's anyway. So I figured that out from it was a known flaw in the system. So I decided to back out of there, but I didn't back out of my 1.54 on my ASCOM update. So I said, okay, everything looked like it was working now with PhD2, but in fact, what I didn't realize was I wasn't doing meridian flips anymore in SGP in Sequence Generator Pro, and my camera, which usually takes pictures until I wake up in the morning, and it's actually taking pictures when it turns light again. It stopped taking pictures at 2:30, 3:30 in the morning, and I figured, okay, a cloud came in and screwed up or something like that. And I looked back there and I realized that, hey, the mount's not where it belongs and stuff like that. Turns out that on the Gemini, it was reporting that the mount was on the east side when in fact it was on the west side. The scope was on the west side, and it was again a known flaw in the ASCOM 1.54 for the Gemini. It took me like 2 hours of sitting there running my head into the log file on Sequence Generator Pro, and then all this other stuff, and then finally I decided to go over to the I guess Sequence Generator Pro website and look for it, and apparently it was a known flaw that the system simply doesn't work right. That system 1.54 reports the wrong side of the mount. Now, why do I go into all that? I guess it was fun to just go through this. And a word of advice for the people that might be listening out there. You really sometimes just have to go through the log file and figure out, okay, there's something wrong. Why is it doing that? And you got to go through and you read each line of the file to see what it's doing and why would it be doing that and everything else like that. I was rather frustrated for a couple of nights there before I finally figured that out. I meanwhile have updated. No, what do you call the opposite of an update? I restored back to 2.2 in PhD and 1.18 in ASCOM Gemini, and everything's working back like it normally should have. So there.
You mentioned something that I I completely forgot about, and it's in regards to PhD. If you have PhD, if you're running PhD, activate your logs. I think you have to check them to turn them on. Your debug log and your guide log, I think it is, you should always be taking them. That way you don't have to troubleshoot under the stars. You can troubleshoot in the morning, and you can look at your logs and see exactly what's going on. It'll report your polar alignment error. I've found, though, the reporting of the polar alignment error to be a little bit sketchy. Sometimes it'll report it differently on either side of the mount. But keep those logs active. If something goes wrong that isn't in your Sequence Generator Pro log, you might find it in your PhD log. If you're losing the star immediately before that, you might see something. And a lot of people ask, oh, how do I get the logs? I mean, I use them all the time, so just to see.
You know, one of the things that was happening when I finally got it working right, you know, down in the corner where Sequence Generator Pro tells you how long it'll be before you meridian flip, it said it was going to be 13 hours. Actually, it said not applicable. And then I checked it out, and it said, hey, it's going to be 13 hours till. Well, it'll never be 13 hours till a meridian flip. You know, that just doesn't make sense. And so I kept working at that, and then I finally got it working. Now it says, okay, it'll be 4 hours till the meridian flip, which was appropriate in my mind. But my first session with Sequence Generator Pro, it bombed completely. It said, hey, wait a minute. It went to the recovery mode. I figured, well, why should it go to recovery mode? And I went back to what had it done was PhD, of course, saves its calibration from time to time. You know, unless you go to a different part of the sky. When I go to a new target, I recalibrate. But all this time, it had been told that the mount was on the west side instead of the east. And so now that I have fixed that, and by updating Gemini, I never bothered to recalibrate. And so it was guiding perfectly well. It was telling it, hey, that star's moved, and I got to get it back. And so it sent the command, but it sent it the opposite way because now the mount was accurate in what it was reporting, which side of the mount it was. So all those little things. It's so many times I see people get complaining about a piece of software when it's probably not a piece of software. It's a whole collection of things getting into it. Hi, Michael. Hi, Michael. Hi, Michael.
Yeah, I think
Michael. Yeah. Anyway,
I think with PhD, like, and especially newcomers, they get PhD running, and it's the settings on the PhD screen that are making their stars drift, and they don't even consider polar alignment. And a lot of the times, I'd hate to be either Craig Stark or the guys on PhD too, because that's probably the #1 question. You always have to clarify: how's your polar alignment? How's your polar alignment? But
how do you use the PhD2 log to view your reported polar alignment error? Because if I pull it up right now, where would I find the...
I use PhD Lab. It's a separate program.
Oh, okay.
And you just open it up. Every time you start a guiding routine, it has like an increment for it. And you just click the increment, and it shows you pretty much your guiding through that. It also reports polar alignment error when you type in your... you have to type in a few specs about your camera and whatnot. Because it does it based on the drift. And I haven't figured out why it sometimes is a little bit odd. But I do know that I found the same thing with Astro Tortilla. Sometimes, like when you're trying to get a numerical polar alignment error, sometimes it just isn't that accurate. But
you know, there's another way to get it. If you turn on the trend lines, you know what I mean by turning on the trend lines?
Right.
If you turn on the trend lines, it shows, you know, it's got those two lines, the blue and the red line, the dashed lines. And then it also reports, or at least I think it does, the polar alignment error right then and there on the graph screen. So I'm still light out here, so I can't show you.
I think that might only be if DEC is disabled. I might be wrong about it. Or maybe that was like one of the last versions, but...
Well, start. You got PhD running? Are you imaging?
No, I don't have it right now.
Okay. Well, it's too bright out here, so I can't show you.
Yeah, it's cloudy here.
Now, one of the things I was noticing that kind of perturbed me was that mine reports as having 1 or 2 arc seconds of error on the polar alignment, and I thought, gee, that's better than I thought I was doing in polar alignment, because I very rarely check the polar alignment, even though I'm permanent mount back there. But at any rate, and then it would go up to like, no, now it's 18. Oh yeah, who grabbed my peer and moved it, or whatever they did, and then now it's 24. Now it's back down to 3. Now it's now it's -2. Now how is it moving? Now, what I was told was that, look, when it gets down to 1 or 2 or 3, it's not all that accurate anymore. Anyway, there's a whole lot of things that could be weirding it out. That I'd have to wait for it to go through several rotations of the worm gear, which is 240 seconds on that particular worm gear, to find out. Well, it just seems to me that it wouldn't be changing. If it were all that accurate, it wouldn't be changing. Because polar alignment doesn't really change. So that's just was a couple of things I noticed about PhD. I saw Craig the other day, Craig Stark. He was just camping at a star party I was at with his son. I said, hi, Craig. Anyway.
Has anybody noticed, does everyone here use PhD 2.3 or whatever the most recent versions are? Probably. Has anybody noticed it like bogging down or like just not being so quick or snappy? Or is it just my laptop that
As I said, mine wouldn't work at all.
Yeah. No, I thought I noticed, and I might be making it up in my head, which is why I hate bringing it up here, but and I'm using it over type VNC, so that gives me some lag anyway. But I feel like the program lags sometimes, and I can't tell whether it is just doing its guiding routine as it's normally supposed to do, or whether the lagging is affecting the guiding in any way. But
did you move over to that QHY camera?
No, I didn't. No, I have the Lodestar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which has worked for me pretty much the whole time. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that. There's a bug in PhD1 with certain Lodestar cameras where the screen just whites out, and I have that problem, so I have to use PhD2. And I really like PhD2.
Damn, my scene's at 1.66.
What is that?
And I'm guessing it's clear. Clear calm. I have to click over to Mike's screen. Clear, calm, dry, and very light.
And the clear sky chart, the clear sky chart is all dark blue squares.
That's cool.
Hey, it's been a month.
It's been a month since what?
The roof was closed for 22 days straight.
Oh, yeah. Well, you got that. Did you get that wizard within the last week? Or was that before?
No, well, I finished up on part of it. I actually submitted that, I think, I'd have to think back, a few weeks back. So I think I had actually done that. Let me look at the dates on it.
And I see Josh has a topic too. Mike's checking to see when he got his wizard or when he completed his wizard. One of the things I wanted to go over, and Josh, I hope you don't mind me jumping in, but I just want to point it out. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't expect it to take too long, but I've been using actions in Photoshop, and actually a lot of us probably have been using actions in Photoshop, but a lot of them are probably the actions that we paid for, Carboni's tools or Annie's actions. I use Carboni's tools. I haven't bought Annie's actions. It's not to say I won't, but first of all, can you guys all see the nebula on my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is first, I see that I have a bunch of layers here, and let's see. I'm going to go to a photo or an image that's actually going to demonstrate it the best. And I've already been through this. So I created an action that has its limitations, but it's really just a basic sharpening action. And I think that it's a good basis for creating other actions. And I'm limited in my knowledge of Photoshop, and I think there are ways to achieve this on a repeatable basis, and I'd love to know if anybody else has any ideas. But this one action I call a layered high-pass filter, and basically what it does is once I click play, it duplicates that layer, I don't even remember how many times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and it sets each layer to overlay. And then it performs a high-pass filter on each layer. Then it sets the opacity to 0. So what you're looking at when I complete this action is the same exact image that you started with. But just by clicking the particular layer, you can take the opacity slider and boost it. And when I do this, I think you'll probably see a pretty dramatic, I'm going to boost it all the way just to show you, but you'll see a pretty dramatic increase in sharpness. Let me bring it in a little bit closer, and I'll show you exactly what it looks like at a closer scale, because it's really dramatic. And again, it's a high-pass filter, so one thing you'll see is the stars are blowing up and out, and what I'd love to do in this action is I'd love to put a star mask on everything, on all of these, which I'm thinking I could probably do in a group, but I'm not quite sure how to make the automated selection of the star mask. There are a few quirks. Some things I've noticed is grayscale images. There's differences between creating a mask in a grayscale image and a color or an RGB image. But in general, I think it's a good kind of start for what could be a really useful tool for a beginner who is probably intimidated by even basic layers. I can say after I started doing this, I've been using them a lot more, and in every image, I end up coming up with what I call kind of a basic layer stack, and I'm going to show you it in this. This is my elephant trunk, and you can see I have my background, then I have a luminance layer, and then I have a color layer. I don't even remember what my... Yeah, okay, so I used a star mask in this particular color layer just to keep the stars at the color they are. And what it allows me to do is, just by using hue saturation control U, I can change the saturation and really boost it. But that really, for this narrowband bicolor image, what I actually wanted to do is I just wanted to play with the hue and see if I could pull out any more interesting features. And I posted one on Astrobin for a very short period of time in kind of this crazy color hue, and I kind of like it. I'm showing it to my friends, and they don't like it as much as the more normal looking stuff, so maybe that means it's too crazy for everybody. But bicolor is kind of interesting in that you want to just show off the structure, and the color isn't as important as long as it's kind of specified. But I always, kind of the point of this was I always end up with this kind of same layer stack, which is basically just background with a luminance and a color layer. And the color layer, and I don't know if this is just the way we do it, but I find that I go back and forth from star mask to luminance mask to star mask to luminance mask, and I think that's probably the way we do it, and I just keep wondering why we don't just add them all together, and I think I might start adding my, wow, my computer performance is slow. I hope you guys are still there. Yeah, you guys are still there. Yeah, so I'm starting to consider that maybe I should be adding my, let's see, let's make sure you still, yep, adding my star mask into my luminance mask, but inverting the star mask. So I'm protecting the stars and revealing the luminance so that I can boost just the brightness of the nebula without touching the stars. And I know it's dancing around the tone mapping technique that we all kind of talk about, and I tried, and maybe it's just that I'm not so proficient in it, but I have trouble envisioning the way the stars and the star color are going to look thrown onto the nebula there. So I kind of like that I can do it. And I know, do it in a layer, right? Do it in a layer so that you can just throw the stars right back onto the nebula. I don't know why I found myself in this spot, but that's kind of where it is. And maybe we'll bring up that tone mapping technique, even though we saw it in Josh's video. It's kind of the way we're all kind of going. So, so I got that off my chest because I've been thinking about that a lot. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that action thing, particularly if you could think of a repeatable way to select stars in any image.
Well, I can show you how to select stars real easily to make a mask, but I don't know that you could record the action. You might be able to, I'm not sure. The simplest way to select your stars, and you could play with this and see if it will work. I've gotten to the point I just make all my star mask in PixInsight because it's a lot easier. But if you want to select your stars, bring your image back up. And you might be able to record it this way, is what I'm thinking.
I'll actually try right now.
I think your wife's hungry.
Yeah. I warned her.
Okay, go down to your background layer.
Yep.
Go into your channels panel. Okay, press. Let me think here. Hold down the Control key and left click. Did it highlight them? I can't tell from your screen.
What's that? All of my channels highlighted. Yes.
Yeah. No. Hold down your Control key and then click left click on the RGB.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now you'd have to deselect any part of the nebula with a lasso button, but I usually go in from there. I would go into expand by about 5 pixels and then feather it by about 3, and then I would turn that into an alpha mask. And I'm trying to think, I'm doing everything in PI right now.
So this would work well if it was an unstretched image, right?
It probably wouldn't.
No?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the issue. But how do you make a star mask off an unstretched image? And it's one of those things that's probably easier in PixInsight.
I think now, let me think here. You can go under the channels, and I think you can add an alpha channel and load that selection into it. Over on the right. Oh, it's been a while since Crawford showed me this. Not a mask. You want to add an alpha channel. Well, you can do that.
Channel.
Yeah.
I think that might be it. Yeah. Yeah. Alpha 1. There we go.
All right, now you can actually save that. Well, once again, you want to, when you get into the main image, you're going to want to deselect that part of your nebula that you've picked up because you don't want to work on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think you can go into layers and add a layer mask. I think you would duplicate the bottom, add a layer mask, and then put that. I forget. There's a way to put the alpha channel into that.
Huh. The workflow is right. I think it's all I think the whole action will be recordable that way. It may not work between. Oh wait. Okay. Let me think. Yeah, it may not work between RGB and color and RGB and grayscale images, but then you could do a separate action for a grayscale if you had to.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm trying to think. I'm not quite sure I understand what it's doing though.
It's just selecting the highlighted areas, which are typically your stars, and then you can do a hide all mask with it, or so that you're not impacting the stars. I think it's simpler now just to do it in PI, but
Yeah.
and then Alt and then hold your mask button down, and you should get a.
Big
And
one,
your
yeah.
selection is there, right?
Yep.
I can't tell.
Yes, it is. That's interesting.
Okay.
So, okay, let me see. So I have to invert it. Oh no, everything's there. What the heck?
It's
No, my
I'm
selection
missing a
was
step here.
no, my selection was the opposite. I know what it was.
Oh.
Okay, so I have to
Step backwards.
yeah, I have to delete that. Go back to channels. Get the alpha mask. I probably have to select all, copy it. I may have to put it into a new image, which I've done before, as you can see. Oh, it's probably a different image. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Huh.
Yeah, it's in Crawford's tutorials, but
Oh, and I'm putting it into a luminance layer. Let's see.
yeah, you got rid of your other background layer.
Yeah, I put it right into the luminance. If that's kind of where I'd want it.
And I think to make it permanent, you have to duplicate it or something. I forget. God, it's been over a year since I went through this.
I think that's actually doing it. I would have to. Let's see. Well, right now it's no. Okay, no. That's doing the same thing. Yeah, no. I'd have to do another step. I'd have to go in and take the star mask and add it to, or take an inverted star mask and add it to the non-inverted luminance.
Hey, Mr. Globular Cluster is here.
It's going to start an online war. We should rename them to globular clusters. So that's been my thought. The Photoshop actions are probably a good way to get things out, but it's kind of neat to find a repeatable way of doing stuff. So, Josh, I want to go back up to you because you wanted to talk stars, exposure times, and saturation tonight.
I did. I also was going to comment on your screen masks, and well, just my experience was combining them as a high pass filter with a screen and then a soft light or overlay together. Usually it was more effective in not changing the brightness of the image, but getting more sharpened out of it. So it's almost, if I was making that filter, I might put each of those into a group and then change the opacity of the group. So I guess the thing about stars, exposure times, and saturation that I've been experiencing here recently, I see different people taking different amounts of, or different length subs all over the place at different speeds. And I'm always curious because I see someone like Matt he's at, and he's getting stars. Can you hear me better now? He is getting stars that are pretty colorful throughout. When I shoot at f7, if I'm shooting 8 minutes to 10-minute subs, then most of my stars, or a lot of them, end up getting blown out. I think I asked Mike about this a couple weeks ago, but I'm just curious what everyone else thinks about that. I guess my impression now is that I should be treating every image as an HDR image and taking 3-minute subs for brighter stars and longer subs for fainter stars. So I don't, if anyone wants to chime in on what their thoughts are
I
on
don't
that.
think you can. That there's the only time that I would shoot two different exposures if I was on a very bright object like M31 or M42 or something like that, or even M81. But otherwise, there's really no reason. You should take a sky limited exposure, whatever you can, the max time you can get um, without causing damage is the best way to go. That's just my opinion.
But that was Mike, right? Mike,
But
Yeah.
the way you said that though is you take it sky limited as much as you can without doing damage. And I think one of the damages you can do is if you take it all the way to some sky limits, you'll saturate your stars and lose the color. And I think what you have to make is a artistic decision at some point. How important is it to get that color in the stars? I was just looking at some pictures of the double cluster, and obviously they needed shorter exposure if I wanted to get the stars. Um,
Well,
so
yeah. If I was
yeah,
going to take a star field by itself or a cluster, typically an RGB image, I would only shoot probably 3 minute subs for color and 2 minute subs for luminance, or maybe 1 minute.
right.
Um,
And where you run into a problem is where you want to get all that good nebulosity in some object, but you also want the color in the stars. And at that point, maybe treating it like an HDR is what you were saying in the first place. That might be an answer.
well, so I guess to answer what Mike was saying and what you were saying, Alex, um, on my most recent image, I was taking 6-minute subs, and the faint stars were only showing up in my 10-minute luminosity subs. So when I brought them in, they're all pretty much colorless and small and faint. And then the brighter stars are fine at 6 minutes. If I stretch that to 10 minutes, like I'd really like to get it sky limited, because I'm nowhere near sky limited at 6 minutes from that site, then I would be blowing out all the stars. So it almost
I just don't see how that's happening. I guess I'd have to see an example of, look at one of your images of. It makes me wonder if it's something. Excuse me. Something in the way you're stretching them or something that would cause that, because that just seems really unusual to me.
I mean, they're all starting out at not all of them, but the brightest stars are starting out at 240, 250, 255. And even the medium bright stars are starting out at 240, something like that, 230.
In all three color channels.
Yes.
Well, then if you want color in those stars, you're going to have to expose less.
And so that's what I was getting at. So if you want to bring out the faint nebulosity and the star colors, I guess what I feel like I'm learning is that you need to get to the point where you're taking 2 sets of subs, if that's what you're really shooting for.
Well, what do you first of all? What are you shooting with?
Now I am shooting with the QSI 683 and a Stellar View 105 triplet.
All right, so I'm very familiar with that setup because I had a 583 and a 105 Stellar View, and I shot a lot of images, and I never in town in my backyard, not where I'm at now, but I never took under 15-minute subs. Like I said, unless I was on something really, really bright. I can look back at some of that data, but that I don't know. I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to figure it out, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you would be blowing that out, which is why I'm wondering how you're stretching your data.
Josh,
Go ahead.
if you're shooting luminance as well,
Yes.
could it be the mismatch between the luminance and RGB channels?
I typically do not keep my stars in my luminance channel, and if I do put in luminance data, I only put that in over the target.
Okay.
I mean, when I open the image, I mean, the stars are starting at, like I said, 230, and at that point, you're just not getting a ton of color if you're starting at 230 or 240. When I'm taking like 10-minute exposures in color.
Well,
Oh,
no, you may be getting color. The key to it is, are they at 230, 230, 230, or are they at 230, 255, 220? You know what I mean? Is there a difference in there someplace?
Yes, once you get away from the center of the star.
You know,
I'd really like to see how you're going through your processing, in kind of steps to see what you're doing, because there's a lot of ways to add color to stars that may not be apparent to you, but it's actually there. Um, Probably, the astro actions where you can add star color, but I've been doing it more and more in PI. Um, I could give it, if you'd like to see, I could give you an example of how I'm doing it, where you're going to see hardly any
Pulls
color in
ask
stars
the
and it will
question,
change. But
stars at levels like 240, somewhere around there, or are you starting with them lower?
well, you know what? I don't even pay attention to it, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm looking at an image right now that I've stretched. Well, this is in an STF stretch, and it's at black is, I don't know, 0.29. It's I would have to let you see, and then you can tell me where you're getting your readings from, because I'm totally lost.
In Photoshop.
Okay. Let me stop my screen share here, and I'll switch over to PI. All right. If I'm pulling up, and here's my screen share, and this was just some stuff I put together today that I'm not happy with right now, but it's let's see, BDB 136. Crop this. Now this is not, these aren't actually stretched yet. They're all linear. I got to see which one I did is what. Integration is HA. Okay, I don't want that. All right, so here's my base image. Now, if I did I'm going to do an STF on it. All right, there's hardly any color in these stars, very little, but I need to correct this image. This image is not ready for prime time, but the stars are showing a little bit of color on the STF stretch, but I'm going to go in and histogram stretch it now. And I'm flying through this. This is not my full normal process, but because I just want to give an example. I can't stand the noise in this.
So, Mike, are you showing me how to add color back into the stars,
Yeah, I'm
or?
going to show you here in a second. I just had to get this stretched. I'm going to show you how I'm going to put color into these stars. And over pretty much the whole image, but I got to get it. I got to do a hair bit of balance or it's going to drive me crazy. One of those OCD things.
I did just go into Photoshop and review one of my raw H-alpha subs unstretched, and I am showing RGBs. Now, of course, this is a grayscale image because it's just a single channel, but I'm showing RGB 236, 251, 241. That's 3 different stars. So it looks like the brightest stars in my image are pretty close to being blown out. But that's really just the 3 brightest stars in there. And I do know from this image I wasn't able to save the centers of the stars. They just kind of got white as I processed despite my best efforts. But
Which scope was that with, Adam?
this is the wizard that I did with my Edge 800. So the SCT.
Reduced, or?
No, this one wasn't reduced.
Okay. All right. So here, these stars are pretty much lacking color. There's a few that look a little red and a hair bit of blue, but that's mostly, just because of different star sizes or whatever. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to make a lightness mask. Then I'm going to go into curves transformation, go into the preview mode, and then I'm going to take my saturation curve, and you see how all that color is popping into those stars?
Yes.
Sure, you do the same thing in Photoshop with a mask, right? Just increase.
Yeah, but this is easier.
Well, sure.
You can do the same thing in Carboni's, more stars, more colors.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
so I guess
it doesn't totally bounce because I can see there's 2 blue. But my point is, they look pretty like there wasn't any color there, but there really was. That's the point I'm trying to make.
One of the points that you got that seems to be missing is it's not just whether it's at 230, but it's whether your levels are the same across all 3 color bands. Okay, if they're the same, then you're not going to have much color. But if there's a difference between them, then you can emphasize one color over the other. If they're all at 255, 255, 255, they're going to be white.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, even if they're all at 230, 230, 230, they're going to be mostly white, but just white and not colored. So.
Yeah, but they're not saturated yet. They're just white.
So most stars should not be at 230, 230, 230. But the problem is when you're getting a handful of stars that, again, shooting at f7, because as Adam was saying, his weren't saturated, but he was shooting, I think, at f9 and HA. But I don't know, for whatever reason, if I'm shooting at f7 with RGB filters and I shoot 10-minute subs, then I'm routinely getting stars as soon as I open the image that are at like 255, 252, and 255 or something like that. All above 250, and not all of them, but maybe the first dozen or half dozen of them, and maybe even a few more. So that's.
I would say that some of those are going to have color anyway because the centers of that star may be blown to white. But
Right.
just outside that would in fact have colors. And let's go back to Michael's screen. Michael, you still got those pictures there? You will notice that even when he says he's got blues and reds and whatever color stars now, you'll notice that yeah, but he's got in the middle they're white.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I did see that, and that's what happens to a lot of my stars too. So I mean, I think it looks nice. I guess what I would be shooting for is color throughout the star, but it has to be a gradient in the star too. Otherwise, they look like flat discs. So.
That's exactly it. Preserving that gradient, not having them be one solid color. That's the difficult thing.
Here, so let's say I'm going to just do a general and show you in Photoshop. If you want more color in your star that way,
I mean, I feel like I have a good understanding of how to add color to the stars. I was just more talking about exposure time, that I'm starting off with lots of cores burned out at 10-minute subs and wondering
well,
what.
I was going to show you how to correct that, though.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
Is there a correlation on a CCD between the ISO? Like a DSLR, you can use ISO 100 and take 10-minute exposures. You're not going to have a problem blowing out your stars, right? Unless you're shooting at f2. You know what I mean?
There's no ISO on a CCD. You do have gain.
Is there a correlation in a CCD that would be the equivalent of low ISO?
Just gain, and that's 2 levels at most, I should guess. I don't. Maybe you guys have different experience, but I just know. I think there's just 2 levels of high gain, low gain, and that's about it. But the problem still remains. Do you need different? What the question was way back when was, do I need to start treating this like HDR, exposed for short times, exposed for long times, and then combine them somehow? And the answer is, if you want color throughout, yes, but I don't think that would look like a very natural picture. I think that you better let some stars go to white in the middle.
I might be inclined, if I were you, to use your RGB for your stars only, if you were to do a tone mapping style technique, because that way you'll have that much more protection.
That is what I started doing. I don't know if you remember that Eastern Veil Nebula I took. That was kind of my first steps towards figuring out how to do that. So that is kind of the direction that I'm leaning towards. I find it interesting, though. I mean, like I said, I see a lot of other images where there seems to be a decent bit of color in the stars with 10-minute exposures, and mine are starting out with a lot of them blown out.
All right, so here's a good example. There's stars in this image right now that are blown out. Can you see that?
Yes.
A good one right here, this yellow star. That's really blown out. This isn't very well color balanced. But how I'm going to fix that is I'm simply going to go up to the blur tool, and I'm going to blur over that star. I should enlarge it so you can see what I'm doing. I need more pixels on that. And I'm just going to blur that star. You see how that bright white is going away, and I'm getting color into the star? I can do the same thing here. And then down here. Now, to me, these stars are a distraction. So the easiest way for me to make these stars not be a distraction is I go into the liquefy command. I size my cursor over the size of the star approximately, and I start clicking on it. Usually just a couple times is all you need. See how it's shrinking those stars?
Mm-hmm.
That's a Tony Hallis trick. Okay, now that star no longer looks like it's nearly as blown out as it did and isn't so dominating in the image.
Yeah, no, it's much less distracting and looks more colorful without a big white disk in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, this image is nowhere close to ready for prime time, but just to give a quick example. But if I didn't go with the longer exposures, I would never be able to bring any of this data out in the background.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why the question came up in the first place, was because stars were getting blown out as you were showing, but you didn't want to give up the color in the main stars. So.
Oh, if you want to see a quick lesson on how Jimmy Walker processes, watch me. Now this is highly exemplified, but this is how he pulls all of his background data out. Just lassoing, feathering, and giving it a slight stretch a little bit at a time. He just happens to have a perfect eye, and he can figure all of that out, what looks really, really good.
That is pretty cool.
But he just flies through it like that, much faster than I am.
Are you manually brightening the corners for vignetting?
Pardon me?
Are you manually brightening the corners like you're getting rid of vignetting?
Well, I wouldn't have put this image together this way. I would have fixed that before I ever assembled it. That's not actually vignetting. That's a gradient.
Right, but you're manually correcting. Is that basically what you're doing?
Not when I was lassoing. No, I would have corrected like this area right over here. I would have corrected that before I ever brought it into the image or assembled it. I would have done that in PI. Or the other thing I would do, the most common way, is I'll duplicate. This is an add and block trick. I'll equalize the data. I'll see where my core data is. I'll lasso that. Then I'll drop that layer down. It transfers it. And then I would do probably a gradient exterminator at a medium. Oh, I forgot something. Sorry. I screwed that up. Select inverse. Filter gradient exterminator. To level it out, but I would do that in Pix Insight before I ever put it together. Anyway.
So I appreciate it, Mike. The kind of, I guess, is a cool way to deal with that, or deal with what I was talking about without actually having to take two separate sets of images. And again, like you said, it's usually not more than maybe, I don't know, 10 to 20 stars that really are distractingly blown out. So doing stuff manually to that many stars isn't, I guess, too difficult or unmanageable.
Yeah, because you don't want to sacrifice your good data.
Right. Right. The one thing that I heard about, I can't remember, maybe it was even my dad was telling me about, CCD Stack has an interesting thing where you can stack two sets of different length subs, and it will basically ignore everything over a certain value and blend in your shorter sub exposures just to that area. So like if you had stars that were completely blown out and you take, I don't know, like half an hour worth of RGB subs for short exposures, it would throw that, average that in with that. But,
Well, Adam shows the best way to do that in his series on making every pixel count, and you do it with setting a range, a rejection range,
right.
and then combine the two images together. You don't want to stack all of those images of different duration on top of each other if you're doing that. You want to do it. There's a different way to do that.
I think you can weight the longer exposure to like 99.
No. It's a rejection method that you're going to use so that you'd have two different stacks, and then you'd combine them.
Right. That's from one of those what I was thinking of. Well, that was really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I like the blur and liquefy. That's pretty slick. So you can do sort of a range selection in Photoshop, right?
Yeah.
Sort of, and then just use that and feather your brighter stars. You could do that, right?
Yeah, you could select your brighter stars with a mask, and then sometimes I've even gone in on the stars where if I have a huge bright star field, I'll select all of them, I'll expand it, feather it, and then I'll just put like a 2-pixel Gaussian blur on it. And it'll take them all down.
That's a cool trick. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, if you're chasing the deep stuff, if you're chasing the deep, dark stuff, then I think a lot of your stars are going to get blown out, especially with luminance. I can't handle the luminance in my red zone. I don't even use it. It's not even in my camera right now. So.
Yeah, I usually don't use it at all. It was my first trip to a dark site in 6 months. I was just itching to use it, so
Yeah.
Thought I'd give it a pass. Cool. Thanks for letting me chat about that.
Anyone else have any topics or questions that they wanted to bring up?
Can I sidetrack real quick?
Go right ahead.
PhD2, I downloaded it. PhD Lab. It said I needed Python 27. So, yeah, of course, I didn't read the whole thing before I downloaded it. So I downloaded Python, and I just drug the DLL file in there, and it won't let me open a file, a log. Like when I click open log, nothing happens. Did anybody run into that, or do I just need to do further research?
Yes. When you open a log, nothing at all comes up, right?
Yeah, I click open log and nothing happens, or file open log and nothing happens.
It happens on my laptop, and I haven't fixed it yet. It works on my desktop. I don't know what the issue is, but
okay, I'll look at it.
Yeah, when I did it on a different computer, it worked.
Okay, I'm not the only one.
Nope.
At least not just me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't remember. Can't remember if I made it work once, but I don't remember what it was. But yeah, I know it doesn't work on my laptop reliably. It might have been the version of Python. Does it say something on the website about being able to download different, or using two different versions of Python?
Yeah, I did. I downloaded the 64, and then I read that it said we suggest you download the 32 as well.
Yeah, that could be it. I don't remember. I don't remember what I did.
Yeah, I'll reinstall it, see if I can get it working.
Okay. PhD Lab doesn't like files where the mount name has a slash in them. It won't error, it just doesn't show anything. I don't know if that could be the issue. I'm trying to think
Well, it won't allow me to actually pick the file. So,
Oh, it doesn't
specifically,
even let you select the file.
right, nothing happens when I click file. I can't navigate to the folder to tell it to open this particular.
Oh, okay. It lets me open it. It just doesn't show me anything when it opens it. It acts as if I hadn't opened the file.
Oh, I think John Tip is probably right then.
Yup. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. Well, I have one note on my list, and that's the bad rap that SCTs get. I'm actually going to switch over to my face. Oh, here we go. That's what was wrong. So SCTs have a bad rap. What's wrong with SCTs? Well, we don't suggest them for beginners. In fact, we dissuade a lot of people from using SCTs. And why is it? Well, first of all, what are the good features about SCTs? Why does everyone seem to gravitate towards them in the first place? Well, it's a light bucket. It's they come in 8 inches, 9¼ inches, 11 inches, and 14 inches. They're small. They're not like refractors that are very long and kind of weigh on the mount in different ways. So they're kind of tight, compact packages. Long focal length, a little slow, but actually F10 is pretty good for visual. So they make great visual instruments. But imaging, that's where it throws everyone. An SCT
Just a
has
second. While you're listening, it's good points. Remember, it's also extremely flexible. There's a lot of stuff you can load on the back of that. A lot of different cameras and all sorts of stuff. And that's one of their main strengths is you can put all sorts of stuff back there. So that's just one of its strengths.
Yep. And actually, you reminded me, planetary imaging SCTs are great. They're awesome for planetary imaging. Deep sky imaging is where we get the hesitance. So what's the, I don't know if I call it the biggest detractor, but what's the biggest issue with SCTs? And it's kind of their benefit as well, the magnification. When you're imaging with it, it's very taxing on your mount because you have lots of magnification, very long focal length, very slow focal ratio, so it takes a long time for the image to ingrain on your sensor. That in itself is difficult for beginners. It just kind of compounds that fact. So that's the key detriment. But the other thing that isn't really talked about is the moving mirror, and maybe it is talked about, but they have moving mirrors. To focus, you actually move the mirror of the SCT. This is unlike pretty much any other type of telescope where you turn the focuser and it moves the entire diagonal and eyepiece away from the front optics, and you're changing your focal. You're changing your focus in that manner. So by doing that, it introduces just a little bit of the concern is it could introduce a little bit of mirror flop. The mirror is riding on a screw-driven bar, so to speak, and there is a little bit of backlash within that bar. So when you're imaging, the mirror can kind of float on that bar. So Celestron has done a great job with the mirror locks to put them on there, but of course when your mirror locks are on there, you can't focus. You have to unlock the mirror locks to focus. So some of us with automated focusers leave our mirror locks unlocked. At the same time, that mirror moving slightly isn't moving with your guide cam if you're piggyback guiding. And piggyback guiding is very common. It's very easy, but it can and does introduce flexure, and I'm going to say it does it frequently with SCTs because the mirror is just one more factor. But, and this is kind of where I turn this around, because what's the benefit of SCTs? Well, if you put an off-axis guider on your SCT, you've pretty much eliminated the issue of the mirror. You've pretty much turned it into pretty good imaging system, assuming your mount can handle it. And if you get a good enough mount, it can handle it. And all of a sudden, you've got a really good imaging system. So I'm not going to say that SCTs are bad for imaging. They may not have everything lined up for them for imaging, but you can overcome them and overcome those issues in certain specific ways. And if you're an imager, I might even say, even though I'm not crazy about diffraction spikes, I might say, you know what, look at an RC if you're looking for that long focal length instrument. But if you like to observe occasionally and you like to do planetary, that's where SCTs really kind of shine, and that's why I still have one, and I haven't replaced it with a different telescope at this point. I think if I were to replace it with a different telescope, it would be a much larger telescope at a similar focal length, which much larger, faster telescope at a similar focal length. So that means it would be a monster, and probably wouldn't work on my mount. But that's something I wanted to say about SCTs. And anyone's welcome to comment on that.
The edge makes a difference from a standard SCT in your star shapes. I'll say that.
Yes. Very apparent.
I have a question about SCTs and focal length and focusing. I've got a hunch that as you move that mirror in and out, your F ratio is adjusting very slightly, and so the edges of your image scale might be also changing. So you may, as you focus for different colors on your RGB or narrowband for your filters, is the focal length going to change a tenth of a, or a very small amount, messing up your image scale?
Yes, you are correct that when you change a focus on an SCT, you are slightly changing the focal length. I myself focus for each of the filters anyway, so it would be a moot point for me, because when I change filters, I change focus. Does that answer your question?
Yes and no. But won't that affect, say, the edges of your field of view or your image scale very slightly,
Yes.
and that makes it harder to stack?
Yes, it will. And I think the question is to what extent.
Right.
And I think I've asked this question for a long time, and I've never gotten a great answer to it. But just in what I've noticed is the amount of difference in your focus doesn't seem to be enough to show up in the stars. And my change of focus is usually the amount that the temperature may change in a night. So like, say, 10 degrees or so. So like, that's the way I determine it. If the temperature drops considerably, I'm moving my mirror considerably, so is it changing the focal length enough over the course of the night? And I haven't noticed that to be the case. I had a big concern about that. Actually, I kind of had a revelation recently, because I had a big concern about using Crayfords with focal reducers on SCTs, because of the same thing. You'd actually then be changing your focal reducer to sensor distance,
right,
for focusing. And after realizing that with an SCT you're also changing your focal length with that, I just don't think it changes by much. The probably best way to test that would be to find a target that you could take on a warm night and find a target you could take on a really cold night, focus both of them and maybe plate solve them, and see how much the image scale has changed.
Well, there's another way to answer that question. I agree with everything that was just said, but remember, when you're registering a stack of sub-exposures, they program in registering the stars has to move them left, right, up, and down. That's obvious, but it also changes their scale. it will notice that, okay, I see all the stars here, but you know what? This one has a slightly different plate scale as the other pictures do, so I'm going to expand everything, and it actually moves it back and forth as part of the registration procedure. You don't even notice it. If you go back and check, pardon?
DSS or
I assume DSS does it. I know Images Plus does it, and it even translates scale and rotate is what the command is called, I believe, in Images Plus, although it's been a while since I've been into Images Plus. But when you, the fact is it's done so automatically, you probably don't even bother to check that they did change, the program changed the scale. Now, I don't know if Deep Sky Stacker does, but I can't imagine it getting by without doing that, because it has to be done almost any time. I mean, so your question was, does it cause difficulties for when you're stacking? And the answer is not if you've got a registration program, you know, your pre-processing calibration program that does that stuff in its registration.
Gotcha.
You know, I think one of the things that remember the moon is or the Mars is as big as the moon. That the thing that happened every August for a while. You guys may not have been into astronomy back then, but
it didn't happen this year.
It didn't happen this year. Did you?
I know. I missed the emails.
You missed the emails, right?
None of my friends told me about it.
Okay, before we birdwalk too far on this, the point is that there was originally, from the scientist who first made the statement, there was a little qualifier on that. When seen through a telescope. Mars, when seen through a telescope, will look about as big as the full moon. Well, when they started running it, they skipped the part about that qualifier, when seen through a telescope. And I think that one of the things that, okay, now back to this topic, SCTs, one of the things that we always say when we're talking about the SCTs is that it's particularly hard to learn on. Once you've got it down, once you've figured out how to do everything, they're not that hard to use. It's just hard to learn on, and so we recommend that you don't start with a big SCT. Okay? But that qualification is quite often forgotten, just like we forget that thing about when seen through a telescope when we're talking about Mars is as big as the full moon. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. I've got another thing about SCT.
Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still on a fork mount, and when I'm at F10 or even at F6, I still get football stars. I still get trailing because of the mount, and no amount of nothing. Even a 2-second exposure, I see star trails on it, and I'm sure I'm positive. Well, as positive as I can be that that's the mount.
What mount is it?
It's a Meade LX200 Classic.
And what size scope?
8-inch.
An 8-inch. So I started with a Meade LX3 from 1987. With proper polar alignment, I was able to get a minute and a half stars with no errors on the best nights. But I could always get 30 seconds with decent polar alignment and get round stars even on the edges. So I don't know that I would blame it on the mount.
Okay. There's a lot of noise in my tracking. And, you know, if I follow, what I should do is just follow the mount sometime and log, I suppose, what my guide scope is seeing, but not issuing any corrections.
Oh, I had a counterweight on the bottom of mine on the fork mount. Do you have a counterweight on the bottom?
On the bottom.
To compensate for the
fork,
camera on the back.
On the fork, you mean?
Yeah, no, I had a rail on the bottom of the
yeah. Oh, yeah, I've got a rail. Yeah.
With a counterweight on it that I could slide back and forth from front to back.
Yes. That's what I'm doing.
Okay.
So that balances the guide.
Huh.
What makes you think that it's in the mount movement as opposed to mirror flopping?
Because I mean, it can be a 2-second exposure, and I still get a star trail. I should be careful and look very closely at that, but it seems as though no matter how short I get, I mean, down pretty short, I still get star trails.
If you're down to 2 seconds to get a star trail, what's a 30-second star trail look like?
The same size.
Exactly the same size no matter what?
Pretty close.
And it's even across the field?
Yes.
You know, you can't have... Okay, try a hat trick for me. It used to be used when an airplane came over and you were in the middle of a 5-minute exposure. Okay? Start your exposure with your hat in front of the... and obviously, you either got a really big head or you got to use something besides a hat.
Right, I know what you mean.
And then open it up, let it run for 15, 20 seconds, and close it up and see what you get.
Yeah, what kind of camera is it?
I started with a Meade DSI, but now I'm a Canon T3i.
Did you get the trails with the DSI too?
Oh, yes, absolutely, because the image scale is it's obvious on the DSI. Or do I mean image scale is much lower? It's a smaller chip.
Sure. It's like a 640 by 480 crop of your DSLR.
Right.
Image.
The problem would still be the same, depending on pixel size, but the size of the chip doesn't matter because you're telling me it's across the field. You got the same problem.
I believe so.
I can't think of anything that would give you an error of the same size, anything dealing with the way the mount is driving, that is the same size error in a 2-second exposure as it is in a minute exposure.
Yeah, and that's what guiding and no guiding both as well?
You know, guiding in a longer exposure helps, but I still, especially at a longer focal length, I still am getting trailing.
I have fireworks going off outside, so I'm sorry if you hear them. The funny thing is, it sounds really similar to an issue that I had with my SCT, and I blamed my mount, my Mach 1 I blamed for a while. I even talked to Roland Christian about it. And in the end, unfortunately, I wasn't able to figure out what the issue was, and it went away on its own. But I was actually almost down to the... First of all, I plastered Cloudy Nights when I was having this issue because it was driving me nuts. I had just got my CCD, and I wasn't able to use it. So I was kind of flipping out. I was just kind of not happy in general. As quickly as it came, it went away. I replaced my T adapter thinking that it might have been some sort of flexure or some sort of flex in that. Just the other day, though, I reused my T adapter as a test, and it didn't seem to show the same stuff. So I was working on, I was thinking maybe it was my mirror. I recollimated a few times. One day I started everything up and it all went away. So it's kind of hard to find these types of issues. You do have a piggyback scope though, right?
Yeah.
Does it show the same issue with the piggyback scope?
It's the piggyback is a 80mm short focal length, so no. I can image without guiding on the 80mm and not see any trailing because I think that the length of that trail is too short to show up on the short focal length.
And you are east heavy, right?
I'm what?
East heavy in balance?
I've got about I've got maybe a pound of steel added to east side of the fork.
Okay, so the gear should be engaged. It shouldn't be bouncing then.
Shouldn't be.
I don't know. It's one of those things you just have to keep on trying until you get it figured out.
Yeah, I did last winter. I took took it apart and cleaned the gears, thinking there was crud in there, but that didn't seem to help.
Try your hat trick and see if there's something about the start of the exposure, mirror vibration. If you try to
Sure.
mirror lockup on your DSLR.
I haven't yet.
I,
And maybe it'd be easier to troubleshoot using the old Mead DSI, because then there's no vibration as I start and stop that.
yeah.
You can try that. Just using a different camera will give you a different perspective. I was using my DSLR to troubleshoot with the issue I was having. Actually, someone just posted on Cloudy Nights a very similar issue they're having with the C6, and I had to check to make sure it wasn't you that posted, but it wasn't. But
yeah, another thing you can try too is the CCD drift alignment. Right, turn on your DSLR, let it expose. Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever used the CCD drift alignment or camera assisted drift alignment where you make the V?
No, I haven't.
So look that up. It's called CCD drift. So you
I'm
basically
familiar
make an
with it. Yeah.
exposure. You use your hand paddle to turn on the. It's like 0.5 or whatever it is, right? 0.1, the guide rate, basically.
Right.
And then slew it east for a while, and then slew it west for a while, and it creates this little V to show your polar alignment error. But if you're doing that and you're aiming like south, it should show your right ascension bouncing. If your gears are bouncing or something like that, it should show it. It should show little stair steps or staggers or spikes or something while you're making that long exposure. So I might try that too to see if it's like in your gear train.
Sure.
What kind of mounts are you using?
It's LX200.
LX200 Classic.
I'm always a big proponent of PemPro. Can you write a PEC to that?
Yes.
PemPro, you can.
I
if
did
you
that at one of those, man. Yeah.
PemPro you can use, I think, for 60 days free.
I did once.
And I don't ever like to, I don't want to ever say anything to try to be critical, but I'll use myself as an example. That's probably the best way. When I had a Vixen mount, which actually was pretty darn good, because I had it hyper-tuned by Deep Sky Instruments in Phoenix, and I had a polar scope on it and everything, and I thought I was polar aligned like there was no tomorrow until I put PemPro on it and watched it over through several cycles, and because it would slew to a zero deck star to the south, and be like so many degrees from the meridian, and would measure it from there, and then I would use it. Well, that was for the PEC curve, but then on the for the polar alignment, it would sit there and go through a series of cycles, and then it would tell me how far to move it which way.
Sure.
It would say move it this way this much, and move it this way this much, and I thought I was right on until it started telling me to move it, so many degrees this way, and I could actually watch the star drift as it was going through the whole polar alignment routine. And I had to do the PEC first, because you don't want if the PEC is off, then it's going to make it look like you have drift.
You've got all kinds of whatnot, yeah.
Yeah, that's not necessarily related to that. But I always make that recommendation. I have to say, I think PemPro was probably the best investment I ever made of all the tools, next to buying a quality mount. but back to the original statement, I think that the hard part about SCTs, there's one thing that was overlooked. There's a couple of things. I think most of us at first, we start out visual, and we take an image of something, and then all of a sudden it's cool, and then we want to, try imaging, and we've already got a mount in SCT, and we didn't think about any of the visual or the imaging requirements when we bought our original packages. At least I've heard that story 100 times, and I myself did the exact same thing. Bought a CGEM and a C8, and took one picture that, God, I would never show anybody now, but thought it was the God's gift to the world. But so I think a lot of times we struggle with an SCT because when we buy the package, a lot of times the mount's pretty low quality and it doesn't track very well. Stellar View, as a matter of fact, told me, because he carried Celestron mounts, and when I had bought my CGEM way back, he said he had a 1 in 6 failure rate that he had to send back to the factory when they started making them in China. That's how poorly assembled that they were. And when I set my CGEM down to Deep Sky at first, he found a thrust washer that was in the wrong position. It was causing my counterweight lock nut to bind on the gear or on the axis on the bottom of the mount. Once he fixed it, I could do a lot better. But so I think that. But then there's another factor that I haven't heard mentioned here that's a disadvantage to an SCT, and that's a closed tube. Anytime you're going to deal with a large aperture apparatus and you have a closed tube, you're going to get tube currents. And the difference between the outside air and the inside air of the temperature of that mirror is going to cause seeing problems. I mean, it's not going to get into the sharpest focus as it could. Because the mirror is typically not going to cool down nearly as fast as what the outside air temperature is cooling down. And that's why an OAG is a good idea with an SCT. I would totally agree with what he said there. But tube currents can be a definite problem. They've come up, some manufacturers, I've seen some aftermarket stuff now. Celestron finally put vents on theirs, but I think I saw Deep Sky Instruments, or Deep Space, I keep saying Deep Sky. Deep Space Instruments came up with some powered fans to help blow on it to get it down. But when I bought this last OTA, and I was looking at like a Planewave 12.5, and I had a long discussion with Don Goldman, and he said, Mike, I would stay away from any closed tube system that you can, because you're going to fight tube currents when you want to really get deep into your imaging, and it's going to affect the detail and the quality of the imaging. And so you're seeing now a lot more of open truss systems that are being built, even on the lower end, and that's for a reason. Because of that problem of a closed system and tube currents, and the difference in temperature between your mirror and your outside temperature typically can be a few different degrees and can make a big difference. Even on my system now, I run fans. It's got a combination of fans and heaters, but I don't need dew heaters where I'm at with the humidity level. But I still run fans, and the reason I run the fans all the time is because Ken Crawford taught me that you always want what's called laminar airflow over your mirrors. That will get you the best resolution and the best equalization that you can possibly get for the sharpest pictures. So I hope I'm not. That makes sense. I didn't understand any of that until people started explaining it to me. But I do agree. I have seen people that have been able to produce just absolutely amazing images with an SCT, or just a low-end. What is that thing that Astronomics sells? It's
the AT8.
Yeah, the 8, and those again. There's some good ones and there's some bad ones, but I've seen some people be able to produce some amazing images with those low-end scopes. A lot of it's in your post-processing and what you learn to do afterwards with the data that you have. But so I'm not going to diss SCTs, because SCTs have come a long way compared to what they used to be. They used to be probably the worst imaging platform. but they've made enough improvements where you can't necessarily say that anymore. But they are definitely a challenge if you don't have a higher end mount that's tracking extremely well to be able to image with. And then you're still going to fight the other issues with it. The best bang for the buck is Newtonians by far, any day, but I didn't learn that until it was too late.
So what do you use now?
I'm using a corrected Dahl-Kirkham design, open truss,
Sure.
12.5 inch. That, it took me a while to get to there, but for wide field, I stuck with a refractor forever. I just kept getting larger and larger refractors because the refractor was just so easy to use compared to an SCT.
Yeah.
And was able to produce some pretty amazing stuff with just a refractor. I had the same. We were talking about that earlier. I had that same setup. I had a QSI 583 and a Stellar View 105, and I produced from my backyard some amazing images with that setup. The smaller your focal length, a lot more forgiving because your tracking errors and all of that stuff aren't going to show nearly as bad as they do. The longer focal length you get. Matter of fact, they have kind of a joke in New Mexico skies. If your scene's above like 1.5, 1.6, and starting to shoot up closer to 2, they call it a refractor night. Because if you have a high focal length system, you don't necessarily want to image because your stars are going to blow. It's just you're not going to get the detail that you want out of that high focal length system.
One of the things we have to be careful of here is that the generalizations that we make sometimes are too broad. In fact, they're probably, certainly 10 years ago this statement's true, and it probably is still somewhat true. There's probably been more astrophotos taken with Schmidt-Cassegrains than virtually anything else. It used to be that's what they used all the time. So they certainly can take really good pictures. Secondly, an awful lot of the variants that we see out there nowadays, they're really Schmidt-Cassegrains with slightly different changes. And what we've complained about as far as the long focal length and the slow F ratios and stuff like that, they're as true for some of these very, very fancy telescopes that have slightly different names, Ritchie, Chrétien, and all these other things. They're just as true for those things as they are for the traditional old, LX8 or whatever it was, way back then. It's that long focal length makes every mistake show up a lot more, and that's why I think most of the time we say, hey, you know what, get yourself a refractor to learn on, and that's where it goes to.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm looking at my friend who's shooting at 3600, and if things aren't perfect, he can't shoot anything. He can waste a whole night if those mirrors aren't just perfectly aligned, if anything is out of whack at all, and we're talking about a $40,000 telescope.
The only thing is, as Adam said, SCTs are great for planetary.
I think you can shoot a lot of other stuff too.
Yeah,
I've seen some amazing. Back to what Alex is saying, they're talking about. I'm not trying to generalize and say that an SCT is a bad platform. I'm saying every system has its advantages and disadvantages. If you're going to a remote setup and having to set up and tear down, an SCT is a very convenient package to be able to get a lot of focal length.
Yeah.
So it's not all bad. It's just there's going to be, with every system, there's pluses and minuses. And as I said, SCTs have come a long, long way.
It would be really hard to do much planetary with 80 millimeter short focal length.
Yeah, unless you're doing the moon.
Yeah, right. And even that, you're not going to get a lot of detail.
Yep.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to go back to Mike's point about the tube currents, because that is definitely a great point. The Edge, which stepped up, I guess, the imaging capabilities of SCTs, also has the correcting lens in the baffle, which cuts down on if you used to have the older C8s, you could open up the back baffle and it would cool itself down very quickly. The Edge, you can't do that because there's a correcting lens in there, so it actually slows that down. And I would say you do have an hour to an hour and a half of cool down time. Maybe not before imaging, but if you're trying to star test, definitely an hour and a half. Kind of a pain in the butt when you are collimating, but definitely a valid concern with SCTs.
But we have to watch how we say that. Mike said that we have to stay away from all closed tube, and then he says
so
he
that was
uses
a
refractor
recommendation
a lot.
to me.
Yeah, but then a refractor is a generally closed tube, so just
but
be
doesn't have a mirror.
Yeah, it doesn't have that big massive glass back there holding temperature. Yeah, I agree with you. So it's not that it's closed tube; it's closed tube with a big mass of glass and no way to cool it.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're right, Alex. I should be careful how I say that.
Yeah,
I didn't want to come across that I was dissing SCTs because, like as I said, I've seen some remarkable stuff with SCTs in the last 5 years. So it's not always the system is not workable. It's just a tough system to learn on.
Mm-hmm. That's the key. That's the thing. That's the thing we don't say. You know, we say, oh, don't start off on an SCT, and people hear SCTs are bad. No, they aren't bad. They just aren't a good place to start.
Yep.
And I do say I would recommend 100% if you're going to use an SCT, get an off-axis guider.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Although SBIG has supposedly said by the end of this summer that summer's almost over, that they were going to have differential guiding available for SCTs. If they do, and that works as well as the presentations that they've given that I've seen, it will make off-axis guiders probably
obsolete.
I don't necessarily say obsolete, but I mean they will make them very inferior to a differential guiding system.
Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but doesn't the SCT have to actually be drilled to install that differential guiding on there?
What they told me is that they were designing them for the main SCT systems were out there, and that was their first priority because those people needed the system more than anybody else. And they did not say the setup I saw didn't show that. I didn't see any evidence of it being drilled in any way.
Yeah, because I was amazed by differential guiding, and then I heard that. I don't know if it was true. Right now, I think they're still designing it, so someone might have seen a prototype or something like that. But it seems.
They had one at AIC last year, and I guess at NEAF this year too.
Yes, I saw it at NEAF.
Did you say that
their biggest market? Yeah, SBIG, and they know that SCT owners are their largest market. That people, if they can get this working right, will jump on this thing if it works as advertised.
But one of the things you got to note there, Mike, and I think you said it very well, was we heard it at AIC and again at NEAF, and we've been hearing it for quite some time. I mean, and it's still not ready. So I don't know how long it's going to take to get ready. It's been a while.
Well, AO was supposed to be all ready to work with Maxim and stuff too, and it's still not.
Yeah. Vaporware doesn't do us any good.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I would definitely go with OAG with an SCT.
Yeah.
Even with all these mounts with encoders, I still think guiding's pretty easy. And when you have your OAG set up and you don't touch the guide camera, you just turn everything on and go. It's pretty easy. So, trying to think with my old guide cam on my piggyback scope, I don't even remember if I bothered focusing, but.
Well, you got to get it set up. You're exactly right. That's going to be the key. And for some people, it's a challenge because, if you don't have an OAG that'll rotate independent of a camera for the pickoff ship, and then it can be a challenge at first to learn how to do it. I don't disagree with that. Ideally, in a perfect world, you've got a camera rotator and you just move it around and place the star in the middle of it. And you don't worry about it. But most field users are not going to have that.
And you need a more sensitive camera too, right? With an
Yeah,
off-axis guider.
Definitely.
Yeah. A really good guide camera is pretty. It will go a long way towards not needing a rotator.
Yeah, I actually had both for a short period of time, the SBIG STI and the Lodestar, and they're both similarly sensitive. I think the Lodestar edges it out, but in Galaxy season, the bigger size of the Lodestar chip helped me. And just those few extra millimeters would almost ensure that there was always a star in my field, whereas with the STI, I didn't always have a star in my field. So I kept the Lodestar and got rid of the STI. And that's it. I didn't expect I'd be doing that. I kind of expected I'd sell the Lodestar because I always hated the way that plug is, even if I wasn't using it. But
well, to give a good example of how the rules don't always apply anymore, in not having a closed system, with the trust system, I'm actually at, where am I at? I'm at 26, I think 2600. I can't remember, 2200, something like that, 2260 maybe, focal length, with a reflector, and I'm guiding it with a 60 millimeter guide scope. Now, technology-wise, not too long ago, that would have been nearly impossible to do.
Right, centroid guiding, right?
Yes. But the key is the system that astrophysics put together that took away all of the flexure problems that normally occur in a mirrored system. But I would still have a flexure issue if I had a closed system, because the mirror inside the system would not be the same temperature as what my guide scope temperature is. The mirror, or it's not to have a mirror, but I mean, they're going to change differently based on the outside temperature. Especially if I had a closed system.
Right, but that's not to say that could be a problem. If you leave your scope out for a couple of hours, it's going to equalize, and you're going to have the same temperature outside as inside, right?
It depends how fast temperature's dropping over the course of the evening.
Sure, if it's going to drop 20 degrees, you're going to have problems with your reflector as well, though.
But the different materials and construction of one telescope versus the tube that's riding on top of it may make it so that they have different, that they readjust the temperatures differently. So even though they may be at the same temperature, that doesn't mean that they will have equalized their focusing and stuff. Although I gotta think that while that may affect focus, I'm not sure it affects aim. And it's aim that you're after. As long as they're still collimated on exactly the same points as when they started, what does temperature have to do with it?
And it goes up exponentially with the length of the exposure as well. If you're only taking 2 or 3 minute exposures, you're much less likely to see that flexure, right? What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, sure, because everything is exemplified by exposure.
Right. If you're taking 20-minute hydrogen alpha exposures, then yeah, sure, the flexure is going to be a big deal.
Well, I'm taking 30-minute shots with perfectly round stars.
Right, 30. Right. So everything has to be just right if you're going to take a 30-minute exposure per.
Well, my point is the change in technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the original, when I started, and I would load a roll of Vectachrome in the OM1, I had to be guiding it, 4 times the focal length of the exposure, of the exposing telescope. So.
Yeah, and then there used to be a rule of 10 to 1, and there's some people are saying now with the changes in technology, that doesn't necessarily even apply.
Okay,
Sure,
here's what
my 2500 millimeter scope with a 80 millimeter, 400 millimeter focal length, scope. So yeah, as long as the seeing is good, I don't have an issue. But that's rare here.
I really improved the arc second guiding of my camera the other day when I was down at Julian Starfest, and I noticed that the TeleVue NP101 has a guide length of 500 or a focal length of 540, and for some reason I thought it was 700 all this time, and so I said, it's 540, and I put that into the PhD guide, all of a sudden I was guiding arc seconds better-wise when they calculated it out, which is going to happen when you change the focal length of your guider. Number of pixels were still the same, but the arc second resolution was better.
Okay, here's what SBIG says. Differential guiding. SBIG has a patent pending on a new guiding technique using an artificial guide star. Although artificial stars are used in a variety of techniques, an artificial star is created near the focal plane of the imaging CCD, and an image of this star is retro-reflected into a separate guide scope. By using one real star in the field of view of the guide scope and the artificial star image reflected from the main scope, the difference in separation caused by telescope drift is used to make the corrections to the telescope drive. Did that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it generates a star. Now, I actually was not quite, I'm sorry, I wasn't quite listening, but as I understand it, it generates the star and then compares it to an existing star in the field. So it's compensating that way.
So what you're doing is you're sending the light from an LED near the imaging chip, the main imaging chip, out through the primary telescope and bounce it off a reflector into the guide scope, and then compare the position of that to your guide star.
Yep.
And so it compensates for any flexure between your guide scope and your primary scope.
So it's basically for flex, because it's not going to do anything for seeing, right?
Oh. From what I'm seeing here.
Well, basically for flexure, it's like pretty much the benefits of an off-axis guider with the piggyback guide scope, or diffractive, however they're referring to it.
Sure. Right. So it's really helpful for like the finder guiders, right, or something that is more prone maybe to flex, right?
Or like I'm doing with a piggyback, yeah.
Yeah, I'm using a piggyback as well. I found a ratchet strap really helps with flex. I'm not joking. You can laugh all you want.
No, I thought of that myself. I actually tried a belt previously. Just right around my waist.
Zip ties, string, like all kinds of stuff, man. Because I bought the rails. Now, I'm not going to bash him or anything, but I bought my top rail for my piggyback guide scope. It's the Orion ST80, and my rings from Scope Stuff, which because I'm on a budget, I want to get like the bargain, but really there's no way to tighten that system down and not. I mean, I can just push it with my finger and watch it rock, So I had to do something.
If you want to see my system, I have it up on the screen right now.
Ooh, red with shiny rivets.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, the guide scope's that little tiny baby sitting right on top of there.
How about
that?
It's
a 60 mil. What focal length is your 60 millimeter?
I think it's, let's see, I'd have to look. 60 millimeter at f5.6 or something. I'd have to figure it out. I don't remember off the top of my head.
450 or something, maybe.
No, I think it's like 2 something in the 200s.
Good lord.
And that's the astrophysics
That's
setup
the
on the
ast-
top.
Yep, that's the astrophysics setup right up there.
Yeah, so it locks your focuser down, or it stabilizes your focuser.
It's steady as it is rock solid. That's one of the keys.
And
You know,
now
because
on a remote setup, you have an electronic finder scope. So that's a good benefit. I missed that electronic finder scope when I went to an off-axis guider. That's the one thing that I really miss with piggyback guide scopes.
Well, put it back on.
Yeah, what guide camera is that, Michael?
Well, in this particular picture, it was an S-Big, but one of the keys, I switched from the STI back to a Lodestar because one of the keys that AP said to make this work successfully is smaller pixels on the guide camera. So the S-Big had 7.4 micron pixels, and the Lodestar was 5 something, I think 5 point. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's smaller pixels, so it works better.
So it gives you lower arc seconds per pixel for the star. So it's a better centroid.
Yep.
Right.
Isn't the Lodestar 8.2 by 8.2?
Yeah, and Lodestar is 8.2.
Not microns. Well, I have a Superstar.
Oh, that's much smaller. I
Hey
want to
guys,
say
I
that's
gotta go. Thanks a bunch.
All right, have a good one, Ivor.
Hey, good night.
Bye-bye.
Now I gotta look.
Yeah, Superstar is like in the 3 range. I think the Quai 5 L.
No, the QSI is smaller than the Lodestar. So I actually had a little bit of problems with. I had better luck when I switched it to the Lodestar over the STI. Superstar. It's 4.65.
It's not a Lodestar, it's a Superstar. It's Starlight Express, but it's a different than the Lodestar.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and Lodestar has a new one out now too, the Lodestar 2, which is supposed to pick up an extra magnitude of stars, which seems pretty cool.
My Lodestar is out in my backyard saying, "Hey, when are you going to do something with me? You know, it got dark. You've been sitting on that old computer in there for a long time."
So okay, like I've got an SCT, and it's closed tube and all the currents, but I keep it outside like all the time. It never comes inside, so it's always outside, and I have like a little slide-off shed that I use. So the picture that I have up now is the last picture that I took, and it's the ring, and it was only 14 exposures at 3 minutes because that's all I could get out of it. I've got light pollution, so this was no filters or anything. But so I've thought about getting an off-axis guider, but I'm concerned that I wouldn't be able to find stars with. I've got a Meade DSI, a color, not even the mono, like the original Meade DSI. So do you think with an off-axis guider that I would have, like, I don't know, better stars, or not be able to find stars with the Meade DSI?
It's very possible you wouldn't be able to find stars, especially if it's the color camera. I had no luck with my Starshoot Auto Guider, and my feeling is just based off the Lodestar and even the STI, just based off the stars that I couldn't get with the STI, I think it really takes the best of the best cameras, and I think like the 3 right now are the Quai, the STI, and the Lodestar, and maybe the Lodestar 2, although I have no experience with it. But I think it would tighten up your stars if you did have a good camera. Now I'm looking at it and I don't see them being off round or anything like that, but I think you would just get a little bit tighter. I mean, you're comparing guiding at 5:1, which I know they say with sub-arc second, or excuse me, with sub-pixel guiding, you're going to be doing better than your actual capabilities. But then when you're using an OAG, you're still sub-pixel guiding, just at a much longer focal length. It has to help. It's just a matter of to what extent. But my experience, my stars tightened right up.
Are you using a focal reducer?
Yeah, on this image, it's 1745 millimeter.
Okay, well, but remember, a focal reducer takes that same image that you had and shrinks the image. What's it called? Shrinks the image circle, and so off-axis guiders are harder to work with focal reducers.
Oh, really? Because it goes in front of the focal reducer. Is that right?
Oh, well, it depends on where you put it, of course, but if you're behind the focal reducer, you're not going to get all the stars out there. The whole image is shrunk, so you just have to be careful where you put it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when in with my S-Big, I see my image circle going through the outside quarter of my image, so I actually see where the light cutoff is, and there are no stars on one side.
Yeah, I just don't think that it's worth it unless I can afford to get the better camera. It's like,
I don't think it'd be worth the struggle. I went through 3 off-axis guiders before I got the different camera. I kept thinking it was the off-axis guider and it was the camera. And this was like 4 years ago, so it was the off-axis guider offerings and the camera offerings weren't what they are today.
I can tell you when my Taurus tracker, when I bought that, oops, all sorts of problems went away.
Yeah. I mean, you also have to buy well. I bought a cheap one, and then I bought another cheap one, and then I bought the telescope service thin off-axis guider, and that solved my problems. When I added a Lodestar, of course. Anything else going on? So, Alex, I'm guessing it's clear.
Yeah, it's clear.
Yeah. I must have had I had 3 days in a row, then 2 days in a row, and I'm actually glad it's not clear tonight because I need some sleep.
Oh, come on. You just tell Sickness Generator Pro to go do it.
whatever. You don't have to work tomorrow.
Actually, I do. I do.
Ah, yeah, but it's a holiday.
Yeah, I'm in retail, so it's a furniture holiday.
That's
gotta
big
go paint.
for you, I know.
I got to paint. Hey, if anybody out there has a what's that called? A Paramount, and you would like to learn how to use it, they're having a special Paramount training out at Goat Mountain Astronomical Research Station, which is our club's dark sky site, on November 15th and or 16th. And it'll be a little star party, and the Bisque brothers. I used to call them the Bisque boys all the time, but one of their chief engineers is a lady named Sarah, and they're going to be there showing off, training people how to use their Paramounts. And if you guys can come on out, it sure would be fun. If you've got a Paramount, you're supposed to have a Paramount to be there.
Well, I'm going to be in San Antonio helping someone set up a new Paramount ME2 that week.
Yeah.
You think we could get them to detour to come out and help Ken and I set it up for them?
Well, you know what? That whoever is setting it up may well want to come to California and get the class.
Ken
It's an
Crawford and I
all-day
are
affair.
setting it up.
Well, that's what I mean. Ken, and well, yeah, but the guy who's owning it,
Oh,
whoever owns it,
yeah.
you might want to change that around and say, hey, let's all take advantage of this.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but I think we're supposed to be done by the 16th because we're flying back to California that day.
I didn't know when I got said, hey, let's have a party at your house.
Yeah. If it was the week before, I'd be there, Alex, because that way I wouldn't look like a total dummy when I get off the airplane.
Mike, come on. You're going to change your basic personality? Anyway, time to go home. Time to get off and go do our. For me, I got to go out there and start up the old telescope.
Yes.
I've probably only got about 3 more weeks of this that I'll be able to participate. My wife is taking another job, and I'm going to have to be going into work at 1 a.m., so I will have to be in bed long before now.
Okay. It was great having you here, though.
Definitely.
I concur.
All right. Well, anytime I'll help anybody anytime I can that
Okay.
ask.
Thank you,
Good
Mike.
night, guys. Good night.
Not always right, but I try to help.
We always think we're right, right?
Just ask my wife. I'm very rarely right.
Thanks, Mike. Man. It was good to hear you.
All right, good night, guys.
Bye, guys.
Have a good one.